A Virginia prison is in the hands of the inmates. The terrifying escape frees 6 killers from death row. As the men run free, police race against time to track and capture the fugitives before they kill again. Mecklenberg Correctional Center is the pride of Virginia's prison system. Completed in 1977 at a cost of $20 million, it is state-of-the-art. The C-Pod of Building 1 houses Virginia's most dangerous criminals, the death row inmates. The double-gated entrance, or the sally port, is the only way in, and there is no other way out. Officer Ron Sawyer is informed a bomb has been found in C-Pod. He is ordered to bring a van to the front of the prison immediately so the bomb unit can move and dispose of the bomb. Prison policy strictly forbids opening both gates at once. But this is a matter of life and death. The bomb disposal team, dressed in protective gear, rushes from the building. The bomb is smoking. One of the men sprays the device with a fire extinguisher, apparently to keep it cool. The greatest crisis in Mecklenburg's short history has been resolved through the quick actions of a few brave men. The bomb is safely outside the prison gates. But the crisis is only beginning. What seemed like a bomb evacuation had actually been an escape. The guards are now captives, and 6 of Virginia's most notorious killers are free.
A big manhunt underway for 6 convicted murderers who broke out of a state prison in Mecklenburg County, Virginia during the night. The inmates were all on death row. The 6 overpowered guards with homemade knives and drove out with a prison van.
As news of the escape spreads, it sends shockwaves through the state's law enforcement authorities. It is the first time death row inmates have escaped in U.S. history. In this program, some of the names have been changed. The Virginia State Police and the Bureau of Criminal Investigation officials are awakened from their beds. The governor of Virginia issues a state of alert to the Army and Air National Guard. The director of the investigative division of the state police, James Lettner, is brought in to supervise the investigation.
The governor was extremely concerned for the safety of any citizens that these escapees might come in contact with. He had been briefed on the background of these individuals. He was aware that each one was awaiting execution for murder or mass murders, and he was extremely concerned that we apprehend these individuals as quickly as possible.
We've got 6 guys on the street now.
Investigator Lettner arrives after the killers have been on the road for over 30 minutes. He immediately establishes a search perimeter. Because the inmates are driving a prison van, police will increase the search area every hour.
We got 6 of them out of the yard right now.
Okay, I assume you're in total lockdown.
We're in lockdown now. We're in lockdown. We're starting to get a final head count on everything.
Have you got a head count yet?
Lettner meets with the warden to learn about the men who escaped.
Let me tell you, it's been about a month and a half.
The news isn't good. The 6 fugitives have been convicted of killing a total of 17 people. The 2 most dangerous escapees are the Briley brothers, James and Linwood. The Brileys ran a vicious Richmond area gang. Police suspected they had slaughtered anywhere from 11 to 20 people. Earl Clanton killed a Virginia woman just months after being paroled for killing an elderly New Jersey woman. Lem Tuggle raped and murdered 2 elderly women. Derek Peterson killed a supermarket manager after robbing him of $6,000. Willie Leroy Jones murdered and robbed an elderly couple. He asked the wife to pray for him before shooting her and setting the house on fire. These are the men who escaped from Mecklenberg's death row. Most of them killed more than once, and would likely kill again if given a chance.
It never occurred to me that we would not capture the escapees. I felt confident we would. It did occur to me that it would be an absolute miracle if we did so without any great harm coming to some innocent citizen.
A full-scale manhunt is in effect. Officers from all over the state are dispatched. Roadblocks and barricades are set up. Helicopters with infrared sensors try to pick up the heat of human bodies hiding in the woods. Police know the longer the killers run free, the harder they will be to recapture. Lettner tours C-Pod, where the inmates were housed.
You can see where they started here. Yeah, right in it. This is the pod, C-Pod.
Officers conduct a search of each cell. They find no clues to where the escapees might be heading, but they do find some makeshift weapons.
The inmates were very clever in both manufacturing and concealing weapons in their cells. One search that we conducted revealed a table leg that had been used to conceal a hacksaw blade, one shank, and some other contraband.
The inmates have been out for over an hour, and investigators know they are armed with knives. And since they had access to guards' protective riot gear, they fear they might have guns. The state mobilizes every possible resource to capture the fugitives. A death sentence already hangs over each of the escapees. These men have nothing to lose. Officers comb the perimeter, searching for any sign of the killer's trail.
This is Cochran right here.
They find nothing.
They're going north. I'm assuming they took 9.
With no clues outside the prison, Lettner hopes the guards can tell him where the inmates have gone.
Let's go out. Come on, let's go.
Perhaps during the breakout, they heard something that could help direct the search. The inmates never spoke of where they were headed.
Cooperate fully.
The guards know nothing.
How would you like to do this?
The guards' lack of information makes Lettner suspect they may have helped the prisoners escape. From his years of experience as an investigator for the state police at other prison incidents, Lettner knows that prison guards can be susceptible to bribes. In 1984, Virginia prison guards had a starting salary of under $13,000. Even college campus police were paid more. Guards complained they were often assaulted by the inmates. The intimidation and low pay affected their morale.
First of all, let me say this to everyone who's assembled.
As Lettner begins interviewing the security staff, he learns tensions at Mecklenberg have been rising for the past 2 years since the execution of Frank Coppola. Convicted of beating a woman to death in a robbery, Frank Coppola steadfastly maintained his innocence. But after being on death row for 5 years, he stopped his appeal and asked the court to execute him. Coppola's execution signaled a controversial change in attitude. He was the first man in Virginia to face the electric chair since the death penalty had been reinstated 6 years earlier. When Coppola was executed, something went terribly wrong. His head and one of his legs caught fire. Human rights advocates accused prison officials of torturing him. And so, among the inmates, Coppola became a martyr.
Frank J. Coppola was executed at 11:27 p.m. in the manner prescribed by law.
Fears had been growing among the death row inmates. Fears the state would embark on a rash of executions. Author Joe Jackson.
When Coppola was executed, I think that the other death row prisoners started to see that they too could be executed. Beforehand, appeals had dragged on. All of a sudden, here's this guy that all of the other death row prisoners look up to, and he's the first to go. And at that point, the other death row prisoners said this could happen to me fairly quickly.
Two months before the breakout, an inmate on death row sent an anonymous tip to the state assistant attorney general.
All right, let's get this place started fast. You want to get done quick.
According to the informant, a bomb was being constructed as part of an escape plan. The scheme also involved an exchange of uniforms with the guards. This information was relayed to the warden, who ordered 2 shakedowns. Officers methodically searched every cell on death row, but found no bomb-making materials or anything to indicate a bomb was being constructed. Jim Lettner finds it difficult to believe the guards were ignorant of the plan. He suspects one of them may have actively aided in the escape. An escape freeing 6 of Virginia's most dangerous men. Over an hour after the escape, police in Western Virginia mobilize and search the area around Mecklenberg's prison in a hunt for 6 escaped killers. As the minutes tick away, they struggle to maintain their search perimeter. Police begin to fear that if the escaped killers slip beyond the perimeter, innocent people might die.
But it is so important that you remember every single detail, no matter how unimportant it may seem to you.
Inside the prison, James Lettner questions the guards, fearing one of them helped the inmates escape.
Everyone else remains. And
desperate to find any clue as to how the breakout occurred and where these dangerous men might be, he calls each officer to account for his actions. As Lettner questions the guards, he begins to understand how the escape unfolded.
Look, baby, look. You don't need to pass him up. Somebody better get on it.
5 guards stand watch as the condemned men of C-Pod take their daily exercise.
That's me. Oh. Come on, baby.
Willie Turner and another inmate approach an officer, telling him they want to go back in early. One of the men claims he has a knee injury. The other says he wants to use the restroom. This is against prison policy. State Police investigator James Lettner.
It was a mistake to allow those 2 individuals to go back separately from the others. If one inmate went back, then they all were supposed to go back. And the reason for that is that by taking those 2 inmates back early, it took 2 of the correctional officers off the recreation yard and back to the cell area, lessening the number of eyes that were available to watch the remaining inmates as they return from recreation to their cells.
Now the ratio of guards to prisoners is disrupted. In the yard, there are only 3 officers left to watch over the remaining inmates.
All right, guys, let's do it. Time to go in. Let's do it. Come on, man. Come on, man.
The other inmates are escorted to their cells. The guards seem unconcerned they are outnumbered 3 to 1.
The correctional officers assumed that nothing was going to happen, that everything was fine, that they had a secure operation, and that they simply didn't have to follow these rules.
Had they been more vigilant, they would have noticed a plan is already in motion. A plan whose success or failure depends on one man, Earl Clanton. The plan also relies on the guards' complacency. They do not bother to count heads. The inmates bunch up and start to push, distracting the officers. Unnoticed, Clanton slips into the guards' restroom. His job, to wait for a signal. A ruthless killer, Clanton was chosen as the man to make the first strike. In 1980, he stabbed an elementary school librarian 8 times in the head. He then took the belt from her coat and strangled her to death. Because they didn't count heads, the guards have no idea Clanton has disappeared. Lettner's report would later indicate this was a breach of security protocol.
It's difficult to believe that when you're dealing with individuals who have, everyone murdered at least one person, and in some instances multiple murders, that the correctional officers would become complacent and feel that they didn't have to count these individuals or know where they were at every moment. It's difficult to believe that that would occur, but it did in this instance.
The guards escort the inmates back to the day room. They never notice one of them is missing. A guard tries the restroom door, but it's locked. The locked door should have sent up red warning flags. In such a situation, prison policy dictates they should call maintenance and all inmates be placed in their cells. But the guards don't do that. Police are beginning to panic. It has been nearly 2 hours and the fugitives have not been spotted. The officers are now working a wide perimeter. They know the larger the perimeter, the easier it is for the inmates to slip past them. Police are on the lookout for the van used in the escape, but have no idea which direction to search.
Warden, could I talk to you?
James Lettner continues his investigation by questioning Nurse Rose Clark. It is customary for Nurse Clark to draw the water from the guard's restroom before she distributes the inmate's medication. Unbeknownst to her, this is where Earl Clanton is now hiding.
Door's
The
locked.
restroom door appears stuck. Nurse Clark notifies the guard. He acknowledges the problem, but does nothing.
All right, get these boys lined up for the medication.
All right, everybody in the room.
Let's go, gentlemen.
Let's go.
Nurse Clark decides to distribute the medication without water, as she has done in the past. As she is making her rounds, one of them complains his toilet is clogged. He creates a diversion, distracting the guards from what is really going on. Officer Hunter joins Nurse Clark as she continues making her medication rounds to the other pods in the building.
The escapees were con artists. They were shrewd in the ways of the street and how they could get around these correctional officers. They had observed from the moment that they entered the institution that certain rules were not being followed, and it played right into their hands.
At Mecklenberg, Building 1 is broken up into 3 pods, A, B, and C. C pod is divided into 2 sections, with a control booth separating the sections.
Certainly. Officer Hughes? Please.
The man who controlled C pod was Rick Hughes. Electrically activated locks give Officer Hughes control over who enters and leaves death row.
Does the control door?
Hughes tells Lettner that one of the inmates got his attention. It was Joe Giarratano, who was housed on the pod's left side. Giarratano asks Hughes to pass a book to inmate James Briley, who was on the pod's right side.
All right, I'll do it this time. Come on, come on.
Linwood Briley and his brother James received death sentences for 7 murders. In one case, they repeatedly raped a woman within earshot of her common-law husband and their 5-year-old son, then killed the 3 of them. Officer Hughes leaves the door to the control booth ajar, as the prisoners had seen him do dozens of times before. He has no idea the inmates are already arming themselves with knives.
There was a fellow by the name of Willie Turner. He was kind of a genius as far as figuring out how to make weapons from the things around him in the prison cell and how to hide them. And he would basically strip metal from around the toilets or the sides of the door or something like that, and sharpen it and make a knife out of it.
Convicted of killing a jeweler in 1978 and sentenced to death, Willie Turner never finished 5th grade, but he learned to read and write in prison. He claimed to have made a key for every cell he ever occupied. The guards suspect he is behind the plan to escape. At James Briley's signal, Clanton bursts from the restroom. He hits a button on the control booth, releasing the other inmates. The prisoners take control of C-Pod in barely 3 minutes. Each of the guards relate how he had been taken hostage and stripped of his uniform. The inmates take the only defense the guards have, their nightsticks, along with their watches, rings, and money. The guards are hogtied and shackled with their own handcuffs. Blindfolded, they overhear the inmates discuss how they need to capture someone in authority.
He's one at a time. Everyone else just relax.
The senior officer is Watch Commander Lieutenant Mark Johnson.
Reconstruct the events from the very first time you were involved.
I got a radio.
Lettner's report indicates he was in Building 3 when he responded to a page. Building 3, located on the opposite side of Mecklenberg, houses the shipping department.
Lieutenant Johnson, please call 161. Lieutenant Johnson, 161.
Lieutenant Johnson is asked to call the extension of the C-Pod day room. The phone is answered by one of the guards held hostage. Lieutenant Johnson has no idea the guard is being held at knife point.
C-Pod left, need you right away.
The guard tells Johnson he needs help with inmate Giarratano, who he says has been wounded in an altercation.
Lieutenant Fisher, Lieutenant Johnson, come in, please.
Johnson calls the shift commander and orders him to report to C-Pod.
So the key is just to ignore them, you know? Don't pay any attention to them.
Nurse Clark finishes passing out her medication to the rest of the inmates in Building 1. The exit is through this locked door.
I've got the wrong seat. Just stay tight and I'll be right back.
Unfortunately, Officer Hunter has misplaced his key. He decides to return to C-Pod, unaware it is now in control of the inmates. Hunter walks right into their arms. Hunter is taken down to the pod's lower tier, where he joins the other hostages. The conspirators need his uniform. They force Hunter to strip to his underwear, then blindfold and hogtie him. The inmates know the security procedures, and they make the system work against itself.
They got the other guards to come to Pod C simply by faking emergencies, that they needed assistance with inmate so-and-so who was not taking his medication or resisting one thing or another.
By creating the illusion of a fellow correctional officer in trouble, the inmates lure other guards into C-Pod one by one. They then capture them and take their uniforms. Nurse Clark is beginning to wonder what is keeping Officer Hunter. When a guard finally arrives, she is relieved.
Hey, turn around.
She has no idea her terrifying ordeal is just beginning. In Western Virginia, 6 convicted killers have escaped from death row and have been on the loose for over 2 hours. Investigators have no leads to their whereabouts. Police are frantically searching a wide perimeter. Using every resource available, they struggle to maintain it, desperate to contain the inmates. Virginia State Police investigator Jim Lettner continues gathering information for his report by interrogating the prison security staff, hoping they will provide some leads to where the escaped inmates are headed. Each officer recounts his terrifying ordeal. One by one, they are taken hostage. The inmates use their uniforms as a disguise to lure more officers into the trap. The guards tell Lettner James Briley wanted to kill some hostages.
Guards in here. I think we'll have to kill a few of them.
There were too many, Briley said. He was afraid they would become unmanageable. Willie Turner, one of the inmates, talks Briley out of it. They had agreed there would be no murders. Derek Peterson returns with Nurse Clark. They take her to a cell. Nurse Clark is alone when Earl Clanton appears. Clanton had been convicted of killing 2 women, and now he has his eyes on Nurse Clark. Surrounded by convicted killers bent on freedom or revenge, the security staff doubts they will live to see morning. The screams of Nurse Clark stir them to anger, but they can do nothing. Linwood Briley joins Earl Clanton. As they begin to molest the nurse, Wilbert Lee Evans stops the men. Willie Turner reminds Linwood to remember the plan. It has been 20 minutes since Lieutenant Johnson received a report about an emergency on death row. He begins to wonder what is happening in C-Pod. He sent the shift commander to help out, but he never reported back. Johnson investigates the situation himself. The stairwell doors lock automatically behind him.
Give me the jacket. Come here.
time for you shaking.
The inmates threaten to kill Johnson if he does not do as they order. Once the inmates no longer have any use for them, the hostages fear they will all be killed. It has been 3 hours since the escape, and still there have been no sightings of the fugitives. Authorities begin to fear they've slipped the search perimeter. If that is true, a lot of innocent people are in danger. As the prison guards continue their account, Jim Lettner still hopes to find one detail that will lead him to the killers.
And got a radio.
In the main control room, Officer Cindy Smith had word that an inmate was injured, but no one had called the paramedics. During the past hour, several officers and supervisors had gone up to death row. None had reported back. Officer Smith begins to worry.
Main control room, Officer Smith.
The inmates on death row have taken all the guards in C-Pod hostage. Having all the uniforms and money they need, it is time to make good their escape and get out of Building 1. They move the hostages to a janitor's closet at the end of C-Pod. James Briley grabs a television set. Somehow he would have to pass it off as a bomb. Now that the inmates have control of C-Pod, they have to get out of the building. At the center of Building 1 is a main control room which controls the door to the outside. The inmates have to gain control of this room. In the main control room, Officer Smith is still waiting word from the officers dispatched to C-Pod.
Officer Smith.
Then she receives a call. It sounds like Lieutenant Johnson. He tells her a man is being sent to relieve her.
By having her supervisor, who was a hostage, call her and tell her that she would be relieved of duty by another guard. She didn't question who the guard was.
Peterson and Clanton, now dressed in guards' uniforms, head for the main control room. Officer Smith has no way of knowing the officer sent to relieve her is Derek Peterson.
Come on, get down on the ground. Get down on the ground. Get down. All right, there you go.
The prisoners now have control of all the doors to Building 1. But there is only one way out of the prison compound: the sally port. James Briley forces Lieutenant Johnson to call for a van.
Got a bomb in Building 1. We need both vehicle sally ports open.
He claims they have an emergency. The van must be brought around to the main sally port.
I'll stay back here with the doors for you.
Willie Turner has an appeal pending and volunteers to stay behind and guard the hostages. In the C-Pod control booth, Joe Giarratano, who also stays behind, pushes a button, opening the stairwell door. The rest of the conspirators, disguised as guards, troop downstairs to the loading dock. Lieutenant Johnson is no longer needed, and so the watch commander is imprisoned in the Building 1 stairwell. They leave behind one of their own in the control booth to open the door and let them out of Building 1. They lock Officer Smith in a closet. On their way out, the 6 escapees raid the room full of riot gear. Wearing helmets to further hide their identities, they place the television on a stretcher, throw a blanket over it, and exit Building 1. For months prior to the breakout, the inmates leaked a story about a bomb being built in C-Pod. So when James Briley warns the officer in charge of the van that they have a live explosive device and it might go off, the terrified officer completely believes him. Linwood Briley sprays their bogus bomb with a fire extinguisher, and it appears to be smoking. The escape has taken less than 2 hours to execute. And now, 6 vicious killers are roaming free. It has been over 3 hours since Virginia prison officials were awakened by terrifying news. 6 death row inmates have broken out of Mecklenberg Correctional Center, a state-of-the-art escape-proof facility. All police have is a widening search and no leads. James Lettner reports that none of the guards conspired in the escape. They are guilty only of errors in judgment. Each error by itself would not have been enough, but taken together, they enabled 6 condemned men to escape. The most pressing question on Lettner's mind is where the killers are headed. Between them, the 6 escapees have been convicted of killing 17 persons. They've been in and out of prison most of their lives. And now, they are free men. Officer Lawrence Harrison of the Warren County, North Carolina Sheriff's Department, on patrol far outside the Virginia authorities' search perimeter, notices a white prison van.
At the time, I thought it was just correctional people could transfer because they do that at night. And they came by, they waved me, and I waved them, and they kept going.
The prisoners have slipped the perimeter, and Officer Harrison has not yet been informed of the breakout. The escapees realize a white prison van would be easily spotted. As their euphoria from the escape wears off, they begin arguing about where they should go, what they should do with the van. Someone suggests they hide the van in the woods and cover it with branches. But that would take time, and the 6 are getting nervous. While driving through Warrenton, North Carolina, a town of about 1,000 people, they find a grove of trees. It looks like a good place to leave the van. The escapees split up. The Brileys, Tuggle, and Jones go one direction. Clanton and Peterson go another. The men get lucky, finding some sweat clothes hanging outside on a clothesline. They ditch their prison garb. While police continue to search the perimeter around the prison, the inmates are running free to the south of their search area. The The fugitives have been on the run for 3.5 hours when a North Carolina Highway Patrol officer discovers the prison van.
211 Central. I'm stopping to check out a suspicious van in the back of the schoolyard.
It's 30 miles from Mecklenberg. It had been driven into some trees behind the Marion Boyd Elementary School. Parked near the playground, the van is hardly inconspicuous. Officers from the Warrenton Police and Sheriff's Department approach the prison van.
Take the door here. Take the door.
Investigators find the riot gear the prisoners used to disguise themselves, along with the television set they passed off as a bomb. Unfortunately, they find nothing to indicate which direction the escapees are heading. The riot gear can furnish a scent for the bloodhounds.
Certainly. And we called around. We're going to call around a certain area.
Yes, excuse me, sir. I think we might have a break.
Back at the prison, Lettner gets word a hospital orderly had been carjacked at knife point by 2 men in uniform. Lettner suspects these were 2 of the escapees. The orderly is lucky to have escaped with his life. When investigators examine his car, they find a prison shank similar to those used in the escape in the back seat. Police know the men have now split up, and 2 of them are on foot. The Virginia State Police, prison emergency teams, and the North Carolina Highway Patrol take over a motel and set up a command post. Because the fugitives have crossed state lines, the FBI is called in. Special Agent James Trotter is awakened in the middle of the night.
The phone rang. My wife answered it, handed the phone to me. It was Wayne Waddell, an agent down in Danville, Virginia, which covered the prison at Mecklenberg. Wayne said something like, Jimmy, I got a problem. We got a problem. 6 guys have broken out of death row here.
The fact the escapees split up would make them harder to find. But if they were on foot, they couldn't go far. Investigators adjust their search perimeter, vectoring in the location and time the van had been abandoned with the location and time of the attempted carjacking.
It's just a matter of connecting the dots, going from point A to point B and seeing how far ahead of you they are and trying to outsmart them and beat them to the next place they're likely to go and be there waiting for them.
Representatives of various law enforcement agencies meet to set up a task force. Coordinating the search is Robert Pence, special agent in charge of the Charlotte FBI office.
Because of the magnitude of this incident, the response from law enforcement, I would say, was massive. We had every FBI agent in the eastern part of the state, along with support that we sent from the headquarters in Charlotte. We used aircraft, we used dogs, we used corrections officers. In other words, it was a door-to-door search, it was a field-type search, and while all this was going on, communications were being sent to enlarge the search, to prepare the rest of the sector and the rest of the country to be aware of these people and be alert for them.
Special Agent Pence needs more information. The names and addresses of their next of kin, records of telephone calls they had made, the identities of persons with whom they were authorized to communicate.
Well, what we did simultaneously was search records to try to identify associates, relatives, neighbors, anyone who these individuals might have tried to contact if they got out of the Warrenton area.
Police set up a tip line. Pence dispatches agents to interview the fugitives' friends and family. Not just to gather information, but to warn them that the killers are on the loose.
We believed that they were still in the area. I mean, we had no indication that they had left, so the perimeter was kept tight and we kept looking for them. But thoughts or feelings creep into you that perhaps they did escape.
Then, what the police fear most happens. A man reports his truck stolen. The truck, a 5-year-old Ford Ranger, was serviced the day before and is full of gas. Within moments, officials from the Department of Corrections, the Highway Patrol, sheriff's deputies, and the local police swarm over the property, searching for any clue that might have been left behind. The man tells investigators his truck would be easy to identify. It has personalized license tags with the letters PEI1. Police order an all-points bulletin put out for the pickup. Investigators can't be sure whether the killers had all fled in the truck or whether some stayed behind, lurking in the backyards of Warrenton. Special Agent Pence.
So initially it was to try to contain them, and then it became a national search. So while all this was going on, while the physical search was going on, communications would be sent advising the rest of the country about what happened here, that we had the largest breakout of death row inmates in U.S. history, and we needed to apprehend them very quickly.
The new perimeter has just been shattered. Now that the escapees have a vehicle, the search area extends for hundreds of miles up the East Coast. As dawn breaks, the day after the escape, police set up a fortified perimeter around Warrenton, North Carolina. Roadblocks are established, and every driver is questioned. Search teams are organized. Every available law enforcement officer is recruited. Police bring in tracking dogs to follow the escapees' scent. Starting in the area immediately around the van, a pattern search fans out like ripples in a pond, covering an ever wider area, requiring more and more manpower. Police comb the woods and search outbuildings, anywhere the escapees might hide. After several hours of searching, the investigators know only that the fugitives had split up. Some of them may have stolen a truck, but police were no closer to finding them than when they started. This morning, the residents of Warrenton, North Carolina, wake up to see helicopter shots of their town on the national news. At the prison, officials attempt to answer the questions of a frightened public.
At this point in time, our primary concern is the recapture of the inmates who are at large at this point, and we are cooperating with the FBI, with North Carolina, with a number of other authorities in an effort to do that.
Fred Patton, District First Sergeant in the North Carolina Highway Patrol.
You could all but chart it like a fog bank as the fear rolled across the 4 counties from Warrenton outward. And as the sightings increased, people became more frightened. The fact that there were in their midst 6 people that had killed 17 folks, had murdered them, including a 5-year-old child. And among their rapes was a 76-year-old woman. They began to arm themselves.
Warrenton residents scramble to buy weapons and ammunition. Citizens are terrified to learn 6 desperate killers are loose in their community. Virginian pilot reporter Tony Geronmata.
There was a lot of tension, a lot of fear. I remember people talking, saying they had their guns, and if anybody came on their step, they would shoot them. Talked to some of the merchants in this little town. Apparently, got cleaned out of guns, and there was no ammunition to be bought.
Residents barricade themselves in their homes. Aware the fugitives have disguised themselves as guards, they are wary of police officers and answer their doors with weapons in hand. Special Agent Robert Pence.
And we had a lot of fear in the neighborhood of Warrenton, where they were supposedly or possibly still contained. People were extremely afraid and scared, and people were going around door to door making announcements that lock your doors, lock your cars. A lot of people didn't sleep there for a few nights.
300 sheriff's deputies, state troopers, and highway patrol officers join in the search, hoping to ease the public's fears. Warren County Sheriff's Deputy Lawrence Harrison.
At that time, that was just what few we had. We made deliveries for the old ladies that would call up to the grocery store want something. We would pick it up and carry it to them because they were scared to come out.
How many people are in the search right now?
I don't know the number.
The media clamors for any information about the investigation.
How many sightings have you had total that you know of?
Well, there have been some confirmed and some unconfirmed. So
How many
confirmed? At this time we have 2 confirmed.
Anything on the pickup?
The anxious public wants to know where the fugitives might be.
What was the time of the last
they're laying low until dark?
Well, that's a possibility.
Is that
Certainly,
something
it's
that you-
easier to move and not be detected after dark.
What do you do in that case?
Earl Clanton and Derek Peterson traded the guards' uniforms for some sweat clothes. Clanton kept his guard's jacket, but ripped off the patches. The 2 fugitives walk into a coin-operated laundry. Having spent a sleepless night on the run, they are hungry and thirsty. They had just been to a convenience store where they bought a bottle of wine and some cheese. The commander of the Prison Emergency Response Team, or PERT, happens to be driving by the laundry. He spots a man wearing a coat. The coat is the same color and cut as a Mecklenberg guard's uniform. Certain this is one of the escaped inmates, the officer decides to arrest him before he can leave the laundry. He hopes to catch him by surprise.
Man, get out, get out. Go, freeze! Let me see your hands. Turn around, get your hands up. Come on, man. Come on, turn around. Make any move.
Clanton and Peterson were out of prison for no more than 19 hours. They didn't go far. And now their freedom is over. The 2 men concede they expected to be caught because they were lost. Turns out it was a convenient place to be arrested. The coin-operated laundry is only a half block from the county jail.
They found 2 of them there. They thought maybe the rest of them would be there. So if we had fear before when the van was discovered, we had a tremendous amount of fear whenever 2 of them were apprehended right in town. So during that early 2 or 3 days, the mood was very serious, and the people were very concerned, very scared. We knew at that point it was going to be a complicated search because they weren't all looking out for each other and they weren't together. and maybe 2 of them were a little more half-hearted in this escape, and now we had to find the ones that really intended to go the route and where they were going.
Investigators debate the possible whereabouts of the other 4 escapees. To Special Agent Trotter, the Briley brothers are at the top of their list.
The Briley brothers killed repeatedly for no apparent reason. They killed women, they killed pregnant women, they killed little children, they killed grown men, and they killed in very brutal and grisly ways, and apparently had absolutely no remorse for any of the crimes for which they were convicted.
Trotter fears that, unlike Peterson and Clanton, the Briley brothers won't give up without a fight.
Police are in a desperate race against time today to find 4 killers who they fear may kill again.
The capture of 2 escapees in the town of Warrenton, North Carolina, only intensifies the sense of fear in the region. On the 2nd day of the search, police scour a North Carolina campground after a woman reports she saw 2 of the convicts jogging across a field. Officers fan out through the woods, emerging hours later with nothing but a cold trail. Sightings of the escaped death row inmates are coming in from throughout North Carolina and Virginia. Each call has to be checked out. Fred Patton, District 1st Sergeant in the North Carolina Highway Patrol.
It was like the dam breaking. First of all, there was a drip, and then there was a minor fluctuation of calls that we would receive as far as sightings were concerned. And then the dam broke, and sightings were coming in by the hundreds. And of course, by that time, we had mobilized enough people and had them spread out to the point that we could respond to the sightings within a short period of time. And that this is what we wanted to do.
Investigators suspect the escapees may have left the area, but they cannot be sure. The manhunt continues in and around Warrenton.
But these fellows are very smart. They know what they're doing, obviously. And they could be dug in anywhere, and they got to turn every limb and every tree.
Helicopters search the dense forests and red dirt fields on the North Carolina-Virginia border. Police patrol the waterways and abandoned houses and stop traffic along all roads and highways looking for 4 dangerous men. Police continue to get tips. Special Agent Robert Pence.
So a lot of those tips were scare tips, they were fear tips, they weren't helping a lot. And I don't believe that any of the calls really materialized as far as giving us direction about where these fugitives might be. But I do think it gave the citizens a conduit to really vent some of their fears and concerns.
A manhunt sweeps the forests and swamps. All day long they search, growing more miserable by the hour. They run out of insect repellent in Warrenton and have to send out for more. The officers endure difficult conditions, all to no avail. Officer Lawrence Harrison responds to several sightings of the fugitives.
Everybody in the whole county has seen them once we get there. And I don't know how many bloodhounds we didn't have here. They would say, I saw him run across the road down here. We take the bloodhounds down there, turned out nothing. And they said, I saw him run down there. We take the bloodhounds down there. And sometimes we probably running them guys. We did see some guys run across the road, but it wasn't the Briley brothers coming from the liquor store and the marijuana patch.
Reports pour in as residents throughout Virginia and North Carolina call police hotlines. claiming to have seen the fugitives. The governor of Virginia posts a $40,000 reward for information leading to the fugitives' capture. Sightings come in from North Carolina and Virginia. Every call has to be checked out, but leads nowhere. Thinking the Brileys might return to their old neighborhood, Richmond, Virginia, police interview their acquaintances and former gang members. Special Agent James Trotter.
These guys just killed to see people die, just to be killing. And I think that's why the Richmond community, upon learning that they had escaped, particularly the areas of Richmond which they frequented in the past, the people were terrified. Their own parents were terrified, not for them, but of them.
In Portsmouth, Virginia, just a few hours' drive from Warrenton, a police officer spots two men breaking into a car.
Hey, police, what are y'all doing? See some hands. See some y'all. Let me see your hands. Step out from behind the car. Step out from behind the car. Let me see your hands. Good.
When he tries to stop them, the two men open fire.
One of our officers saw Linwood Briley in the 1800 block of Elm Avenue, but then he lost sight of him. And shortly before 9 o'clock, another officer spotted Linwood Briley and James Briley here at Elm and Lincoln. Apparently they were tampering, or appeared to be tampering, with an automobile in this area. As soon as they saw the officers, they ran.
As fears spread, the sightings keep coming in from far and wide. If the escapees did steal a pickup truck, they could be anywhere. The missing vehicle had enough fuel to get past Richmond.
Hey. Yeah, he's right up there.
On a hunch the fugitives might head north, agents begin interviewing gas station attendants just north of Virginia's capital.
Some black guys in a pickup truck?
One attendant remembers seeing a pickup truck with one white man and three black men.
In the back. 4 guys pull out the
Investigator
highway.
Jim
One was in a
Ledner.
pickup truck, one was in the bed, and
I was absolutely convinced that at least 2 of them, and perhaps 4 of them, were capable of murder or any other crime, and would eventually commit other murders if they remained on the street.
Having lost their perimeter, investigators scramble for clues to where the fugitives might be headed. They focus their attention on the leaders of the gang. They begin by examining a log of phone calls made from death row. The log indicates the Briley brothers made a number of calls to the Philadelphia area. The log entries lead agents to one wrong address after another. They begin to suspect the Brileys entered false phone numbers. Michael Carbonell is a supervisory special agent with the FBI in Philadelphia.
Based upon all the negative investigation we had conducted, I felt that those numbers were not right. In other words, they were not telling the guard which number they were actually calling.
Investigators subpoena the toll records corresponding to the phone on death row. When they compare it to the handwritten log, their suspicions are confirmed. The phone company's records show the actual numbers the Brileys called. Agents now have over 50 good numbers to investigate.
Okay, the only other thing we had was maybe mail.
Two of the calls had been placed to a house in North Philadelphia. Investigators know from prison visitation records that the Brileys have an uncle who lives in North Philly. Carbonell set up to trace their uncle's outgoing calls.
I didn't think that the Briley brothers would be staying with him, and I didn't want to hit his house until we were absolutely sure that they were here. The time was on our side at that point, so we decided to put a surveillance on his residence, and we conducted that surveillance for probably 4 or 5 days.
The FBI watches the Brileys' uncle's every move. Although they never see him with the Brileys, the agents have no choice but to wait it out. As the FBI chases every lead on the fugitives from Mecklenburg's death row, they get another break hundreds of miles from Virginia. Lem Tuggle and Willie Jones took 8 days to make their way to Woodford, Vermont, a little resort town just south of the Canadian border. The men had spent the night in the woods. They decide to try and make it to Canada. The two fugitives have a problem. Their stolen truck is low on gas and they need money. Tuggle leaves Jones and drives back to a souvenir shop he had visited 3 days before.
Oh, hiya.
Diet Coke.
Waiting for the right time to make his move, Tuggle asks the owner for a soda.
And there will be anything else for you, sir?
Yes, ma'am.
Drawing a hunting knife, he demands all the money in the cash register. Once Tuggle gets the money, he turns and walks out. The woman notes the truck's license tag, PEI-1. It is easy to remember. The take is about $80 and change. It isn't much, but it's enough for gas and a new start in Canada. Unfortunately for Tuggle, he is heading in the wrong direction. Ronald Wunderlich has just woken up and is about to head off for an all-night job guarding a nuclear power station. When he hears the report of a robbery at the Woodford gift shop. Wunderlich is a constable in a town of only 300 people. His Ford Escort doubles as his patrol car. In Stamford, Vermont, it seems unlikely he'll have to engage in any high-speed chases. Trooper Daniel Begiebing also hears the report. The dispatcher says that the suspect was last seen driving east on Route 9.
And the dispatch advised that upon running a registration check on the motor vehicle, they had discovered that it was a stolen vehicle suspected involved with escapees from the Mecklenberg area.
Begiebing accelerates to intercept the vehicle. Wunderlich is driving out of Stamford when he spots the suspect vehicle coming right at him on the wrong side of the road. The constable whips his Ford Escort into a U-turn and begins a pursuit. Author Joe Jackson.
Most the town constable had ever really done before was to hustle drunks off the street and check out reports of stolen bicycles. And all of a sudden he was chasing this crazy man who had robbed a store at knife point.
Wunderlich radios Begiebing that the truck is now heading south toward the state of Massachusetts. Trooper Begiebing goes from a Code 2 to a Code 3 response, using his lights and siren.
I was accelerating around probably 80 or 90 miles an hour to try to meet them, to make up some time and distance before he got north to the intersection of Route 100 and Route 8.
If they act quickly, they can set up a roadblock before the convict has a chance to slip away. On the radio, Begiebing hears that other officers are joining the chase. Wunderlich advises him that the vehicle is turned around and is proceeding north on Route 100. The trooper and the fugitive are now heading straight for each other.
At that time, I was trying to find a good location to execute a stop where there weren't any residences around, where we could have something of relative safety, yet still be in enough of a field of view where I could see the truck coming.
The officers now realize they are pursuing a convicted killer. When Begiebing swings his vehicle across the road, he knows he is putting his life on the line in a high-stakes game of dare.
There's a little element of danger involved, but yet it's something that, being a rural patrol officer, you rarely see, and you're kind of like saying, oh no, to yourself, you know, that what have I gotten myself into here?
Begiebing is gambling that the suspect isn't desperate enough to ram his cruiser, or that he is a good enough shot to stop him before he does. A Vermont state trooper and a town constable have boxed in one of the death row escapees. It's now a question of whether Lem Tuggle, who had been convicted of killing 2 persons, would be squeamish about killing a 3rd. Weighing his options, Tuggle pulls over and stops.
I then ordered him to place his hands out the window so I could see his hands, and we then ordered Tuggle from the truck to lay down on the pavement, and then approached him and took him into custody. He identified himself to me as, you know, my name is Lem and I'm from Virginia, and something to the effect, I expect you'll find that I'm wanted.
Lem Tuggle has been a fugitive for just 10 days.
Come give me a hand.
He seems almost relieved to be captured. Tuggle admits that robbing the gift shop was a big mistake. But the truck was out of gas and he wanted to get to Canada. The next day, an unusual call comes in to the Vermont State Police.
State Police Derby.
The man gives the dispatcher his name.
Willie Jones. Yes, can I help you?
He says police are looking for him.
For what? Where?
He'd escaped from prison.
I can't. Mecklenberg? Mecklenberg where? In Virginia? For what?
He had broken out of death row.
How long? When? And you want to turn yourself in? I will be sending the cruiser up, the police up to talk with you.
When Tuggle didn't return, Jones became lost and confused. Tired of being on the run, he wanted to turn himself in. The dispatcher asks Jones to describe where he is. She determines that he is on Route 242 outside the town of Jay. Jones tells the dispatcher he is unarmed. In his 26 years as a trooper, this is the only time Richard Armitage has ever had a fugitive call and ask to be picked up.
He just looked like he was ready to turn himself in. He looked dejected, he looked tired, dirty, hungry, and it was obvious that he'd been bit by a number of the black flies that we do have in this area. And it was like the weight of the world had been taken off his shoulders. He was so glad that he was going where he could get something to eat and something to drink.
It wouldn't have been difficult for Jones to enter Canada. In Vermont, the border is only guarded at the highways. If he knew where he was going, he could have easily just walked across. But Jones gave himself up just 5 miles from the Canadian border. Author Joe Jackson believes Jones may have been overwhelmed by his newfound freedom.
They live most of their adult lives in prison. I mean, prison is their world, and so they're able to figure out how the prison world acts, but they're not able to figure out how the free world acts. They fit in the prison world. They don't fit in the free world.
With 4 of the 6 fugitives captured, only the Brileys, the most dangerous killers, remain at large. With their well-known history of vicious murders, the 2 remaining fugitives seem to be everywhere. Sightings come in from as far north as Montreal. In Richmond, Virginia, where the brothers went on their bloody rampage, everyone locks their doors. A manhunt is organized in Oxford, North Carolina, after a man thought to be Linwood Briley steals some cans of food from a convenience store. In Richmond, Virginia, the family of a former gang member who turned state's evidence against the Brileys is given police protection. Investigators question Lem Tuggle for clues to the Brileys' whereabouts. Tuggle tells police how the escapees wandered through Warrenton looking for a vehicle they could steal. They hot-wired a pickup truck and took off. Tuggle tells them the Brileys had never been in Portsmouth or Richmond. He says they didn't kill anyone while he was with them. After stealing the pickup truck in North Carolina, they drove north to Philadelphia. They burned the guards' uniforms in a trash can. According to Tuggle, the Brileys claimed they arranged for someone to meet them with clothes and a gun. Tuggle further recalls that James Briley stuck one of the guards' badges into a tree in Philadelphia's Hunting Park. He and Jones then headed north towards the Canadian border. Tuggle claims they even stopped and asked 2 state troopers for directions to the New Jersey Turnpike. There they were, driving along, 2 escaped convicts from a maximum security prison. Wanted by the FBI and law enforcement agencies in several states. But apparently no one noticed them. Tuggle says he and Jones eventually parted company at a campground when he left to rob the gift shop. Special Agent Mike Carbonell comes to Philadelphia with a map of the park drawn by Tuggle.
I frankly didn't believe it. I'm familiar with Hunting Park. When I looked at the map, there were no tennis courts drawn on the map. I was skeptical. I felt, why would a guy who's on death row, who's going to be executed, cooperate with us?
Searching the trees, investigators find the guard's badge. This confirms Tuggle's story.
I was stunned. I didn't believe it. But the proof is in the pudding. The badge was there, and then we knew that they were here.
The FBI knows the Brileys have an uncle in Philadelphia. They believe the 2 fugitives will probably contact him if they haven't done so already. Special Agent James Trotter.
They set up a surveillance and sat there for days, nothing. He would call me and report. He would say, the guy's not doing anything, nobody's coming or going.
Agents get a break when they shadow the uncle to a body shop specializing in upholstery and vinyl car tops. Days earlier, a woman in New York notified police she received a call from James Briley. The call originated from this garage. Its owner, Dan Latham, had been introduced to the Brileys by their uncle using false names. He called them Lucky and Slim. The FBI sets up a fixed surveillance on Latham's garage. Agents see several men hanging around, but aren't sure if they're the Brileys. They send in an informant from the neighborhood to try and confirm an ID.
He was a street-type guy who was very sharp, could really maneuver in that environment. We sent him in there. He actually talked to James Briley. He came back out, met with us. He said, "I think it's him."
A tattoo on the suspect's left arm further confirms the ID. Agents believe they have found James, but they see no sign of his brother Linwood. They wonder whether to go in and arrest one, or wait with the hope of getting both. But if they wait, Virginia's most notorious serial killers might slip away. After 19 days of searching, the FBI believes they have located the last two escapees from Mecklenburg's death row. They have taken refuge at a body shop in North Philadelphia. The two fugitives appear to be having a party. Having confirmed their identities through an informant, agents decide it's time to move in. Garage owner Dan Latham is surprised by all the commotion.
I myself was in the office on the phone, just taking it easy, and I heard some wheels screeching, coming to a halt, and I heard a lot of screaming. I looked outside, all I seen was guns, a lot of guns.
Both brothers admit their identities and are led away in handcuffs. The nationwide manhunt is over. The last of the Mecklenburg Six are recaptured. They had been free for 19 days. For Sergeant Fred Patton, it is the end of a nightmare.
When the Briley brothers were finally apprehended in Philadelphia, it was like the weight of the world had been lifted off of you, because I reiterate that these were bad folks. These were killers.
The Briley brothers, who are facing death sentences in Virginia, were picked up at a car shop on Philadelphia's north side. FBI agent John Hogan says they were surprised when 20 agents surrounded them.
They were apprehended without incident. They caused no problem to us. They have both admitted their identity. They have the appropriate scars and marks, so we know who they are.
The Briley brothers were the last of 6 convicts to be rounded up after their escape in the largest death row prison breakout in U.S. history. That was 3 weeks ago at Mecklenberg Correctional Center in Virginia. The Brileys will be arraigned in Philadelphia today on charges of unlawful flight to avoid confinement.
The FBI wants to make certain the Brileys can't slip away again. Special Agent Trotter arranges to have them kept in federal custody.
In these unlawful flight cases, usually as soon as you catch them, you dismiss the federal warrants and leave it between the two states to work out getting them back to where they belong. The FBI's out of it. But we were able to keep these guys in federal custody long enough to have them return to Virginia through the federal system rather than having to go through state extradition proceedings.
In the wake of the escape, Mecklenburg goes into lockdown. The governor of Virginia announces the firing of 5 guards. The warden and his security assistant are suspended without pay. An investigation by 3 independent consultants finds that conditions at Mecklenberg are highly dangerous and at times unmanageable. 2 months after the escape, riots break out at the prison. Using homemade knives, inmates stab 2 guards and take 6 others hostage. Author Joe Jackson.
A lot of violence in the prison before the escape, but once the escape occurred, that was like a symbol to a lot of the other prisoners, and so at that point the lid blew off of Mecklenberg, and there was a big riot.
It appears to be a repeat of earlier events. Only this time there is no escape. The standoff ends shortly after sunrise. Corrections Director Robert Landon resigns 3 months later. Before he leaves, Landon puts many changes into effect. Doors to the guards' restrooms are now locked all the time. Open stairwells where inmates could hide are boarded up. Stricter procedures are put in place. An interlock is installed on the main sally port, preventing both gates from opening at once. With these changes in place, Jim Lettner believes that such an escape could never happen again.
Corrections were made to our institutions, both in the way jobs were performed, as well as new regulations that were instituted that makes our prisons more apt to be escape-free in the future.
In October of 1984, as Linwood Briley's execution grows near, he is quoted as saying, "At least I had my 19 days." Briley is the second man in 22 years to be executed in Virginia. But in the aftermath of the escape, officials step up the rate of executions. Six months after Linwood was put to death, James Briley follows his brother to the electric chair. In that same month, Earl Clanton Jr. pays the price for the 2 murders he committed. Derek Peterson, one of the first escapees to be recaptured, makes his final walk in 1991. Willie Jones is executed in 1993. Willie Turner masterminded the escape, but he remained behind because he had an appeal pending. Convinced of his innocence, he puts his faith in the system. Willie Turner is executed in 1995. By that time, the state of Virginia stopped using the electric chair. Turner's life is ended by lethal injection. An hour after the poison stops Turner's heart, his lawyer finds a loaded .32 caliber homemade gun inside a typewriter in his cell. Along with the weapon is a handwritten note that reads simply, "Smile." The last escapee to die is Lem Tuggle. On December 12, 1996, the convicted double murderer is led to the death chamber. Joe Giarratano, whose book passing started the escape, had his sentence commuted to life in prison. Of all the conspirators, he is the only survivor. The escape of the Mecklenberg Six shocked and terrified the nation for 19 days. The coordinated efforts of police and law enforcement officials returned the men to face the ultimate penalty for their crimes. Since the escape, the Commonwealth of Virginia has executed over 80 people. State-sanctioned execution continues to be hotly debated in Virginia, America, and around the world. A body falls from the night sky. To understand this tragic death, police must follow a winding trail of clues. They struggle to learn whether it was merely an accident or something far more sinister. Each menacing clue heightens the mystery as police seek to uncover the identity of a man who kept dangerous company.
Don't!
In this program, some of the names have been changed. September 10th, 1985, midnight. A plane flies under the radar.
Come on, strap it on.
Two men prepared to bail out. It was a desperate act, but they were out of options.
You'll be fine.
They put the plane on autopilot, uncertain of the dangers that awaited them. They leapt into the vast night sky. The next morning in Knoxville, Tennessee, Sam Reed and his daughter went about their morning routine. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary until Sam's daughter headed outside for the morning paper.
Dad?
A man was sprawled on their driveway.
Dad?
He didn't appear to be breathing. Sam's daughter called 911.
Knox County 911.
Knoxville Police Lieutenant Jerry Day was alerted.
The dispatcher called us and said, we have a dead body. It has a parachute attached to it, and it appears this individual has died from a fall.
Car 32, check a 1091 at 19210 Pin Oak Circle, possible 1091 in the driveway.
Car 32, 10-4, and rather Hall 4.
Police and paramedics arrived in minutes. Paramedics confirmed the man was dead. No one in the neighborhood had seen anything suspicious. The man must have fallen in the middle of the night. It appeared he had been dead for some time. His primary chute had not deployed, although his hand clutched the ripcord. It appeared the emergency chute opened on its own.
We have someone who is skydiving in the middle of the night, which is very unusual. If you do have skydivers, they're usually out in open areas in daylight time. So we knew immediately that we had something that was going to be very unique.
Nothing about the situation was what the officers expected, including the condition of the body.
What we were expecting was to find an individual who had massive wounds from impacting the ground. What we found was what appeared to be very minor superficial injuries. We weren't sure why it was such a small amount of injuries in this individual.
The officers expected to see a much greater amount of blood. His wounds didn't seem consistent with a violent fall to the ground.
There was a cut underneath the chin, the mouth was bleeding, the nose had been bleeding, and the teeth were rearranged as if the jaw had been impacted with something very hard. But beyond that, there were no other outside physical injuries.
The officers suspected the victim wasn't from Knoxville.
He was wearing very expensive jump clothing. It appeared to be things that we would say were high dollar, which you don't normally find on most area skydivers.
He was carrying several $1,000s in cash.
We started looking for ID. We found his wallet, and inside the wallet we found a driver's license to an Andrew Thornton out of Kentucky, but only to find behind that another Kentucky driver's license with his picture, but with another name.
The other name was Andrew Bourbon. Officers had no way of knowing which name, if either, was real. But it was the next discovery that stunned Knoxville police. Inside a large black duffel bag strapped to the victim, investigators found small parcels, each containing what appeared to be a kilo of unprocessed cocaine. From the markings on the drugs, investigators deduced they were packaged outside the U.S. Neighbors were drawn to the scene but couldn't give the officers any information. No one had seen or heard anything suspicious that morning or the night before. The officers took the evidence found on the body back to headquarters to examine it. They were looking for additional clues to the parachutist's identity. The man was carrying various handguns.
9mm Browning high power.
We start through the backpack to find a fully loaded semi-automatic 9mm, plus the Derringer, which is the type of a weapon that's going to be used by someone who is either working in a deep cover operation or is a survivalist, someone who's going to have a backup weapon, which a lot of police officers carry.
The guns were sent to the lab for testing. A pair of night vision goggles were even more puzzling. They were only available to the military. There was no serial number to use to trace the goggles' origin.
You had all kinds of evidence that showed that this was a really bad actor, someone who meant to survive whatever situation he found himself in.
A notebook contained names and odd groupings of numbers. It appeared to be some kind of numeric code, though Detective Day was unsure of its meaning. Inside the bag, investigators also found South African gold Krugerrands.
That's an expensive membership.
They suspected the man carried gold so he could flee to another country and easily convert the untraceable Krugerrands to local currency. Most disturbing to the officers, however, was the discovery of Teflon-coated bullets.
Teflon-coated.
Ammunition that is Teflon coated and is only used to penetrate body armor, which normally is worn by law enforcement officers. These bullets are normally called cop killers, and individuals who are dead set on not being captured will use that type of ammunition.
Detectives scrutinized the two Kentucky licenses. They placed calls to authorities there to determine if either was legitimate.
There was no idea by anyone in the investigative area as to who he really was. Once we found the passport, driver's license, we started trying to pull everything together to make a positive identification.
Right on top of the driver's license.
They also found a membership card to an exclusive resort in Miami.
These aren't easy to come by.
Weird looking.
In the dead man's pocket, investigators found a key with some strange numbers on it.
Look at that.
I've never seen one like that.
Well, yeah, that's an N number to, that's a tail number off of an aircraft. That's an aircraft key.
Detectives weighed the stash of cocaine.
We don't normally come in contact with 34 kilos of coke, over 80 pounds at one time. Occasionally, we would get involved with cases with pounds, but nothing of this magnitude.
The street value of the cocaine was almost $20 million. Too much for a small police department to protect. Fearing their precinct could be targeted by criminals desperate to get their hands on that much cocaine, they called for help.
We contacted the Drug Enforcement Administration and told them what we had. We told them we had a large quantity of over 70 pounds of cocaine and that we didn't want to keep it in our facility.
The DEA had a vault that could secure it. The victim's main parachute hadn't been deployed, but his backup chute was open. Forensic technicians examined the dead man's equipment. They were looking for signs of sabotage. But the equipment appeared to be in perfect working order. It was unclear why the victim's primary chute hadn't deployed.
He appeared to be an individual who knew exactly what he was doing, which made the parachute accident seem somewhat strange to us.
The officers would have to rely on other evidence to determine how and why the man died. Technicians examined the gun, but found no fingerprints, and gunmetal residue tests came back negative. It had not been fired recently. The county medical examiner began conducting an autopsy later that day. He hoped to find tattoos or other identifying marks. There were none. The medical examiner did find various injuries on the man's body that did not make sense. Bruises and contusions appeared inconsistent with a fall to the ground.
They could find no external injuries or no bullet wounds or stab wounds or anything of that nature.
And it appeared the man had been dead for several hours, perhaps even before he struck the ground. According to the preliminary autopsy report, something or someone had hit this man before his fall or in midair. It was looking less and less like an accident and more like murder. While investigators grappled with the puzzling clues, the remarkable tale quickly became the media's lead story in Knoxville and across the South.
A man was found dead in the driveway in Knoxville. Police are still investigating the circumstances surrounding this bizarre death. Officials ask that anyone with any information about the incident please contact the Knoxville police.
We hadn't rolled him over yet.
The publicity paid off. A ranger with the U.S. Forest Service in Georgia made a puzzling discovery. A black duffel bag, identical to the ones found near the parachute victim, was snagged in a tree. Another one lay on the ground. The bags contained another 150 kilos of cocaine. Several more duffel bags were found strewn in the Chattahoochee National Forest and in Cherokee County, Georgia, just south of Knoxville. From the location of the drop sites and the amount of cocaine, authorities speculated the drugs had come from somewhere south of the U.S., perhaps Central or South America. Media coverage of the event led investigators to their next big lead. Back in Tennessee, an employee at a small Knoxville airport contacted authorities. He'd seen the news and had found something he thought was perhaps linked to their case.
One of the maintenance men from the airport had discovered a parachute and a reserve chute and a green jumpsuit.
The gear had been hidden behind a building. Investigators suspected the gear could have belonged to a second parachutist.
Yes, it is. I just found it. And
he probably survived the jump and hid the chute before he made his getaway.
Lieutenant Day?
The detectives soon received yet another call, this time from officials in North Carolina.
The drug enforcement investigators called and stated that the remains of a plane had been recovered on North Carolina, and that it might be associated with the parachutists that had landed in Knoxville.
Clay County, North Carolina lay due east of Knoxville. Detective Day had no idea what he might find at the crash site. They hoped that somewhere in the twisted wreckage lay the clue to the identity of the mysterious dead man. In late summer 1985, officers in Tennessee were investigating the mysterious death of a parachutist. They suspected he had a partner, but had no leads as to his identity. On the dead man's body, investigators found weapons, cash, and millions of dollars worth of pure cocaine. They got a break when a fisherman in North Carolina contacted the local sheriff to report a plane crash. The accident occurred on September 11th at around 1 a.m.
A local fisherman who was night fishing on a lake near the Cherokee National Forest heard a low-flying aircraft approaching his location, and then it flew over him, which kept his attention. And then the next thing he notices is the flames from the impact of the aircraft hitting the mountain.
It took 5 hours for Detective Day and federal agents to hike to the crash site.
It was a very devastating crash site. You had trees which had been sheared off 3-4 feet above the ground, and there were probably 5 to 10 of those, which tell me that there was a major impact. When we got to the aircraft, one of the main things we were looking for was if there were any other bodies.
The plane was destroyed, but didn't have much burn damage. Apparently, there had been little fuel left when it crashed. There was no luggage, no flight documents, and no bodies. There were even few seats. Most had been ripped out, leaving the cabin hollow, a standard procedure in drug runs.
The N number on the aircraft matched the N number on the key that we found on the body in Knoxville. That was the connection for us between this aircraft and our skydiver.
Like the odd clues found on the body in Knoxville, the plane crash didn't seem logical.
Of course, we had no other bodies, no other drugs within the aircraft. We were still very perplexed on why he was jumping out of a perfectly good aircraft and putting it on automatic pilot, which was very evident from the wreckage and the levers and things in the wreckage.
The wreckage offered no new clues as to the reason why the man jumped from the plane. They were also no closer to finding the identity of his accomplice. The trip to North Carolina left authorities with even more questions. But the biggest question was finally about to be answered. Word had come from Lexington, Kentucky on the identity of the dead man. One of the man's IDs was a fake, the other legitimate. Fingerprints confirmed it. Their victim's name was Andrew Carter Thornton II. He was a former Lexington police officer and was known to Kentucky State Police Detective Don Powers.
When I first met Drew Thornton, I was impressed that he was a go-getter, hard worker, a good officer.
Years earlier, Drew had been a member of the police department's first narcotics squad. The squad found early success cleaning up Lexington's streets, but they soon began to gather some unwanted attention. Their drug busts had become marred by a string of complaints from defendants about their treatment at the hands of the police.
I was aware in the mid-'70s of certain problems that were occurring within the Lexington Police Department. There had begun to be all kinds of rumors about how their drug unit was operating, some of the strong-arm tactics.
Growing allegations against the narc squad also attracted the attention of the FBI. Special Agent Jim Huggins.
They were kind of a rogue group that pretty much skirted the law and did a lot of questionable things in enforcing drug laws around the University of Kentucky campus and the Lexington community. They were allegedly involved in planting drugs on suspects, stealing drugs out of evidence lockers and reselling them and this sort of activity.
Thornton and his crew were moved to other positions. The FBI learned it came too late. Drew Thornton and his friends had made many contacts within the drug world.
The more we got into it, the more people started to surface, and then it was almost like a web. It started expanding out into different crimes, different people, different states, different countries.
The Kentucky State Police and the FBI opened investigations into the activities of Drew Thornton. They learned he had partnered with a friend of his, Frank Barkley, and opened a security business.
Barkley was another Drew Thornton type guy, very smart, very impressive, and if these guys, Thornton and Barkley, had put all those talents to good use, there's no telling what they could have done, but unfortunately they decided to go the other way.
The men ran with a rich crowd. Wherever Drew and Frank were, money was always being thrown around. The word on the street was their security business was an alleged front for the sale and distribution of marijuana.
We were mainly gathering intelligence reports and formulating a plan and trying to somehow verify some of these allegations.
Barkley was the money man. The two were known simply as the company. Drew Thornton handled the supply side, acquiring weapons, vehicles, and drugs. The duo had a reputation of doing anything for a buck.
I think that Thornton prided himself on living on the edge, on being a soldier of fortune type person, on being almost invincible, that he could do anything.
Serial number 19.
Because of his dangerous lifestyle, Lieutenant Jerry Day and the Knoxville police were beginning to suspect that their skydiver had not died from a mere accident. "48 hours after the skydiving death of ex-cop Drew Thornton, the FBI took over the case. Newspapers shouted the mysterious details of his death, and Kentucky residents were shocked. Lexington Herald reporter Valerie Honeycutt.
He came from a very well-respected family, and there was a lot of people in Lexington who just had a hard time believing that he was involved in drug smuggling.
Lexington, Kentucky is surrounded by beautiful country and lavish horse farms where some of the world's best thoroughbreds are raised. Drew Thornton was well known to the region's wealthiest families. The day after Drew's death, federal agents, armed with a search warrant, entered the exclusive Lexington home where Thornton lived. At the scene of his death, agents had been left some enticing clues: cocaine, guns, and ammunition, and the parachute of an unknown accomplice who had escaped. They hoped that somewhere on his property, they would find a clue to explain the bizarre circumstances surrounding his death and lead them to his accomplice. But a search of Thornton's house turned up no new evidence. FBI Special Agent Jim Huggins.
Someone had already been there and taken whatever incriminating information there might have been.
Investigators turned to Thornton's former employer for help. Lexington Police Detective John Bizak.
We were asked if there were people who could identify not only his body, but certain things that they'd found on his person. We recognized telephone numbers and names in the address book. Of course, there were several names and telephone numbers which we were familiar with.
One of the names in the phone book was Wes Trotter. He was a close friend of Thornton's, and both men had been questioned in an unsolved missing persons case years earlier. Socialite Amanda Finley left her parents' home on January 25th, 1977 for a routine appointment.
About 5:15 in the afternoon, she turned left, traveled south in her car, heading to a doctor's appointment, and was never seen again. She had talked to her father earlier in the afternoon, said that she would be home for supper.
Her parents called police after not hearing from Amanda in 4 days. The Finleys told police it wasn't unusual for their daughter to take off, but she would always call. When her boss confirmed she hadn't shown up for work, the family knew something was wrong. A week after her disappearance, Amanda's car was found, abandoned in a local parking lot. The storekeeper said the car had been parked there for several days.
Her coat and other belongings were found in the vehicle, but her car keys and her purse were gone.
Forensic evidence technicians combed her car looking for fingerprints, blood, or any signs of foul play. They found nothing. Months passed, and the Finley case turned cold. The press, however, did not forget her. Reporter Valerie Honeycutt.
Amanda Finley was a beautiful young woman from a well-known family. What police knew from the onset was that she had had some connection to Drew Thornton and Wes Trotter. Exactly what that connection was has never really been clear.
Amanda had been dating Wes Trotter, a member of Lexington's narcotics squad, at the time of her disappearance. Her parents feared he knew something about their daughter's whereabouts.
Trotter and Thornton were interviewed very early in the investigation about their knowledge of Finley and what information they had as to when they saw her last. Trotter claimed that he used her as an informant on drug investigations, off and on, but other than that had no relationship with her.
He also claimed he hadn't seen her for weeks.
There were allegations that came from personal friends of Finley that she had told them she was involved with Trotter.
But Thornton claimed he only knew Finley through Trotter and had no idea where she might be. Then, Detective Bizak got a lead on the missing girl.
We had telephone records from Finley that showed she had placed some calls to Florida prior to her disappearance. We also had information that a person who appeared to be her had been sighted in Daytona Beach, Florida. That was certainly enough to warrant a trip to Florida to determine if there could be any other eyewitnesses or any evidence that she was in fact there.
The phone calls had come from a restaurant.
Yes, recognize this girl.
There, Detective Bizak met witnesses who identified Amanda from photos. Lexington police believed their victim was in fact a runaway. More than 6 months after Amanda Finley vanished, a man came upon an unusual find that made detectives question their conclusion. A purse floating near the banks of the Kentucky River. By analyzing the contents, the purse was identified as Amanda Finley's. Fearing the missing persons case could possibly be a homicide investigation, the river was dragged. The dock lay just a short distance from Drew Thornton's property, 70 acres of land he co-owned with Wes Trotter. Kentucky State Police Lieutenant Don Powers.
As a result of that purse being found, we then did become involved in some aspects of that investigation, in so much as trying to see if we could locate Amanda.
It seemed that Drew Thornton was constantly surrounded by mystery and possibly murder. The list of those who could have wanted Drew killed was growing. On September 10th, 1985, Drew Thornton jumped from an airplane into the night sky above Knoxville, Tennessee. It was the last jump Thornton ever made. He was found the next morning, dead in a man's driveway. While police were still trying to determine what caused his death, Drew Thornton was buried in a Lexington, Kentucky cemetery. Drew's body was found with nearly 80 pounds of cocaine strapped to it. The FBI was trying to find out where he got the drugs. His funeral drew dozens of Lexington's elite, politicians, police officers, and local aristocrats. Investigators kept a close watch on all his associates. They hoped one of them held the key to the mystery. Many of Drew's friends couldn't accept the rumors generated by his death. Reporter Valerie Honeycutt.
There was a great deal of mystery surrounding Drew Thornton's death. There was a lot of people in Lexington who just had a hard time believing that he was involved in drug smuggling.
But the FBI knew differently. They had been watching Drew's friends very closely. Agent Jim Huggins.
Well, this group is kind of unique from other drug organizations because of their social status in the Lexington community, and a lot of people in high places gave them some aura of respectability, which they certainly shouldn't be entitled to, but they were.
Thornton, along with his friend Frank Barkley, ran a business they called The Company. The FBI believed it was a front for a drug smuggling operation. The men had connections in Las Vegas with a notorious pair of drug smugglers. Jimmy and Lee Chagra were believed to be two of the biggest and most dangerous drug traffickers in the country.
The Chagras are extremely fearless and desperate individuals, and they were heavily involved in some serious drug smuggling.
Lee, nicknamed F. Lee in his hometown of El Paso, was an infamous Texas attorney known for his successful defense of drug dealers. His brother Jimmy was also well known to law enforcement. Currently out on bail, he was waiting to stand trial for drug trafficking.
There was a pretty intense investigation going on in Las Vegas from the U.S. Attorney's Office and DEA into their activities.
The Chagra brothers made millions running drugs from the largest suppliers of Colombia's infamous Medellin cartel. The company wanted a piece of their action.
Barkley was the one that ingratiated himself with the Chagra organization and had a lot of connections with people in Las Vegas.
The feds had never been able to successfully try the Chagra brothers, despite their reputed ties to the mob, Mideast terrorists, and Colombian drug lords.
There were separate operations, the Chagra's operation and the company's operation, and it's kind of like a merger. Barkley took all his assets and teamed up with Chagra, and then they really became involved in some big-time smuggling.
It appeared to investigators the heads of the company were stepping up to the big time. Federal prosecutor Brian Layton.
Barkley wanted the high life, and the quickest way to get to the high life is to run drugs.
Agents began hearing from informants that Frank and Drew were going to start running drugs for the Chagras, and they were looking to expand their gang. They began scouring small and rural airports for pilots who could meet their criteria.
What are you certified to fly?
They had to be good pilots. They had to be able to fly without lights, without instruments, land, get off the plane, take off, and allow somebody else to unload the dope, and then they would later get paid.
A little bit of risk, a lot of reward, and I think we'll fix it.
I think most of the people that got involved in this, they got involved for the thrill of it. It's thrilling. You go out and buy airplanes, you smuggle dope, you toss that airplane, go buy another one.
The men developed a routine for their drug smuggling operation.
Right, count it.
They felt it was a sure way to stay ahead of the police.
Check out the title. If you have any questions, let me know.
The team would buy used aircraft for cash.
Is it accurate down here?
They would equip them with extra large gas tanks. They'd take the seats out so they could carry large loads, and started flying to South America and back and forth, and recruiting pilots, bodyguards, and it was a very sophisticated drug smuggling operation.
By the late 1970s, the company's drug running operations were in full swing. With each run, they got better and were able to smuggle larger and larger amounts of contraband. For Barkley, this meant more money and more power. Drew and Frank wasted no time in using the Chagra's connections. They began buying as many drugs as they could afford in Colombia and shipping them to the U.S. When they landed in the U.S., unloading was done in record time by trained ground crews. They knew any delays could mean getting arrested within minutes.
We began to have some airplanes that were abandoned at various airports that were searched and had marijuana residue, and we began to get information that Thornton was involved in these.
On one occasion, they landed at a small Lexington airport with a massive 20,000 pounds of illegal cargo. Authorities found the planes afterward, empty and scrubbed clean with disinfectant, but had never caught the men in the act. In one of the planes, the occupants had left behind a clue, a magazine addressed to Mr. Andrew Thornton.
In my view, that was the first clue to a lot of people here in central Kentucky that some of their local sons were involved in a major drug running, smuggling operation.
It seemed there was no limit to what the company and the Chagras could achieve. But only a few months after the two groups teamed up, tragedy struck. Police in El Paso, Texas got a report that Lee Chagra was found shot to death in his office. Jimmy called Barkley for help. Unsure who had executed his brother, and fearing for his own life, Chagra had nowhere else to turn.
Executive protection limited.
Jimmy Chagra needed protection.
Tonight, well, first thing in the morning.
He called in a favor from Frank Barkley. He asked the company to protect him.
I'm going to need 3 plane tickets to Las Vegas. Wes, me, and Drew.
Seeing this as a possible opening to move in on the Chagra's empire, Frank agreed.
You're not going to Vegas without a plan. What are you doing?
He started making plans to beef up security in Chagra's Las Vegas home. Drew, however, was wary.
All I'm asking for is a couple of hours.
Working this closely with the Chagras meant more power and more risk.
Wait a minute. Come on.
Any shakeup in the Chagra empire would inevitably cause trouble for the company.
You're smarter than this. Don't do this. Come on.
Frank was determined not to let Jimmy Chagra down. But Jimmy was in trouble. He was arrested in San Antonio, Texas, charged with importing marijuana and cocaine from Colombia. The prosecution had been gearing up for this case for months.
Judge, we're here to request a reduction in bail.
Bail was set at $1 million, an amount Chagra's attorney argued was excessive.
My client, first of all, has no prior record, no pre.
U.S. District Judge Robert Drews agreed with the defense and lowered the bail.
Your Honor, there's plenty of
He
reasons.
vowed that if Chagra was convicted, he would not get off easy. Jimmy had a long run just out of reach of the law. But this judge was known for being tough on drug dealers.
We have plenty.
Judge who was trying the Chagra's case was known throughout that area as an extremely harsh judge in drug cases.
Your Honor, that's it. Meeting's over.
At this time, the ties that bound Jimmy Chagra and the company were tighter than ever before.
They were extremely fearless and desperate individuals, and they were heavily involved in some serious drug smuggling, and they saw, I think, their empire getting ready to come down.
May 29th, 1979. It was the first day of Jimmy Chagra's trial, and Judge Drews had no idea what awaited him when he stepped from his home that morning. His wife heard the shot, but did not see the sniper. Paramedics responded quickly to the scene. The judge had lost a considerable amount of blood. It would be a race against time to save him. When drug smuggler Drew Thornton was found dead on a driveway in Knoxville, Tennessee, with 80 pounds of cocaine strapped to his body, local law enforcement was baffled. The FBI had been tracking Thornton for years.
Next slide.
They took over the investigation, hoping to learn more about the events leading up to his death and find out who he was working for when he died. The more they looked into Drew Thornton's death, the more difficult it became to try and piece together his life. Years before Drew's death, he and his partner, Frank Barkley, had become linked with notorious drug smugglers Jimmy and Lee Chagra. Lee had been murdered, and Thornton's company was now providing protection to Jimmy Chagra. FBI agent James Huggins.
The Chagras are extremely fearless and desperate individuals, and they were heavily involved in some serious drug smuggling, and they saw, I think, their empire getting ready to come down.
Jimmy Chagra was in serious trouble. He was up on drug charges, and the judge presiding over his case was notoriously tough on drug smugglers. On May 29, 1979, Judge Drews was walking out of his house when he was shot. Paramedics arrived within minutes and were now working to save his life. It was a losing battle. The judge had lost a lot of blood.
We're gonna lose him before we get to the hospital.
Despite all their efforts, they couldn't save him. Judge Drews was pronounced dead on arrival.
Contact the hospital. Tell them to DOA.
News of the assassination of a federal judge reverberated in FBI offices across the U.S., including Lexington. FBI agent Jim Huggins.
It just shows how dangerous these individuals were and that they would stop at nothing to keep their operation going.
The sniper was captured and prosecuted, and Jimmy Chagra was convicted of drug charges, but escaped the country before he was sentenced. Although the FBI suspected the company might somehow be involved, they, like the Texas police, had no proof. They maintained surveillance on members of the company, but they found nothing to incriminate them.
Just gonna go down, pick him up, come
With the Chagras out of the way, the company showed no signs of slowing their business dealings.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty simple.
They were looking to intensify their drug runs to Colombia. Pressure from investigators concerned Barkley. He brought in a new member to the gang to help solve his problem. Mike Kelly was a licensed gun dealer in Lexington. Federal agents suspected he was the alleged go-to man for anyone looking for illegal weapons.
Mike Kelly was an electronics expert, had a small company in Lexington that supplied radios, alarms, and this kind of equipment.
Yeah, we did what we,
According to federal surveillance reports, Kelly was in contact with Frank Barkley and Drew Thornton on a frequent basis.
Yes, the first installment.
We had heard some rumors that they were getting ready to do a big drug deal, but we had no specifics.
The company was so effective at moving in the shadows that law enforcement seemed powerless to bring their illegal dealings into the light. Investigators continued pressuring anyone who was associated with the company, and some of them started to talk.
Just answer when possible, yes or no. Okay.
Danny Yates had been hired by Barkley as a pilot.
What was it exactly that you did steal?
He was implicated on smuggling charges and was issued an ultimatum by prosecutor Brian Layton.
That's it.
Cooperate or go to prison for a long time. None of these people had ever been in prison before, and they didn't like the prospects of it. We needed their cooperation to go after Barkley and some of the big boys. And so we struck deals.
In exchange for immunity, Yates confirmed the company was looking to increase their drug-running activity. Yates said that Colombia had become a regular destination for Frank Barkley and his business associates. The death of Lee Chagra had left a void that Barkley was only too willing to fill. Barkley had long had his eye on the Chagras drug empire. Yates told investigators Barkley was particularly seduced by this new world. It seemed a prime business opportunity.
He's gonna stay right here with me.
Combining assets with the Chagras had given them access to aircraft brokers and weapons experts.
Sorry about that.
And working directly with Colombia's top suppliers meant they no longer had to deal with the middleman. But Frank Barkley had a problem. He needed to come up with the cash to buy the drugs, and he didn't have any. But Barkley was ruthless in running his drug business. Tom Burke, one of the men accompanying Barkley, would learn that the hard way. Frank decided to leave Burke behind.
That person was left with the Colombians as collateral for payment for the dope, because Barkley would not pay for the dope up front. The Colombians didn't trust him, and they said, well, if you don't pay us within so many days, this guy dies. So they kept him captive down in Colombia until the dope got into the country and Barkley paid for it.
For Barkley, it was a small price to pay to keep his drug lords satisfied. He was looking to make money, no matter who got hurt. He had to find a better way to pay for the drugs. Barkley came up with another plan. Investigators learned he found a source of drug money thousands of miles away at a naval station in California. A man taking inventory of specialized radio and guidance equipment noticed that some items were missing. When the man called his supervisor, they checked the requisition orders and couldn't find any record that the items had been removed.
Thursday the 26th.
The man's supervisor contacted the FBI. Special Agent Mike Devitt.
I was notified by the Naval Investigative Service agent at the base that an individual there had apparently requisitioned some equipment that he apparently had no need for. And that when they confronted him, he had some very elusive answers as to what happened to the equipment.
They questioned the man who had taken the goods. He told them 2 men approached him and asked him to help them obtain some radar and guidance devices.
We interviewed this individual. He was pretty vague initially as to what it was used for, because he had been told by the 2 individuals that had approached him in order to obtain this information to just be on the lookout for certain types of equipment.
The man went on to say that he had several meetings with John Barkley. His name was familiar to investigators. He was Frank Barkley's cousin. Agents set their sights on John Barkley. They pressured his suspected accomplice.
He basically realized we had him in a pretty hard spot. We obtained permission from the United States Attorney's Office to actually tape record his phone calls.
Their witness got in touch with John Barkley.
Hello? It's Randall.
But as federal authorities listened to his phone conversations, it became clear that John wasn't the brains of the operation. It appeared Frank Barkley was in charge.
Barkley was in charge. There wasn't any question about that.
Okay.
Agents set up surveillance at John Barkley's home.
We'd conducted surveillance. We'd seen him move in some of this equipment. We knew for a fact we had him cold on the theft of the government property.
In the fall of 1979, John Barkley was seen in possession of the stolen military equipment. But the FBI didn't arrest him. They continued to watch John Barkley, hoping he would implicate his cousin in the thefts. From talking with informants, investigators pieced together Barkley's plan to take the equipment. He was an electronics technician who worked for the U.S. Air Force. Because of his work on classified radar systems, John Barkley would have had security clearance.
So you can pass second checkpoint.
In the summer of 1979, with the aid of insiders on the base, he asked his friend to help him steal 10 sets of Starlight night vision goggles and a variety of technical equipment which could be used to outfit small planes to avoid detection.
They had some instruments installed in some of the planes so they could pick up when radar beams were being directed their way, so that they could drop or do whatever they had to take action.
Barkley must have counted on the fact that the equipment was older, ignored, and that checkpoint guards only stopped vehicles on their way in, not on their way out. He thought this equipment would never be missed. He was wrong. Investigators had recovered most of the stolen equipment, but 3 sets of the night vision goggles were still missing. Federal prosecutor Brian Layton had a theory on where the missing equipment might have gone.
Barkley thought it was a very good idea if he could get military equipment because he found that it was cheaper to steal military equipment and trade it to the Colombians for drugs than it is to pay him cash.
It was the strategy of a consummate businessman. Lower costs and up the profit margin.
Okay, you can use that?
Yeah, looks good. Yeah.
Colombians have a lot of money. They like gadgets, and so they just love these little gadgets.
Layton knew the company was still in action, and he was determined to bring them down.
We knew we had a huge operation on our hand, a very well-organized operation on our hand, a bunch of dangerous people.
FBI Special Agent Mike Devitt.
We started tying it together, building upon what we had developed initially, and now all of it was mushrooming into a full-blown narcotics investigation.
How old are you? 32?
Yates went on to tell them that with the arms coming in from China Lake, Barkley could finally get his man out of Colombia.
How old are you? 32.
He hatched a plan that would serve two purposes. Barkley was angry with an associate named Ray Deming. He asked him to join Yates in a quick run to Colombia. Barkley told Deming he had to leave a man behind on his last run and hope to win his freedom with an extra shipment of arms. Within minutes, Yates fired up the engine, and the plane was headed down the runway. They flew south-southeast over the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean, headed for the northern coast of Colombia. Deming soon learned this was not a typical trip.
You know what we're doing up here?
Yates had a confession to make.
Wish I knew. Wish I knew.
His marching orders were, at the time that the trip was initiated, were that when he got over the Caribbean, he was to put the plane on automatic pilot and throw Ray Deming out the door.
He threw the plane into a dive.
Hang on, all right? Pull the plane back. Hang on.
The Caribbean Sea rushed closer and
Hang on, all
closer.
right? Just get out!
It was a controlled ditching. As it turned out, Danny Yates was a very accomplished pilot. He just put it down in the waves.
Yates knew there was an unspoken code among drug smugglers. An uncompleted mission will be forgiven if you have to ditch your plane, either by accident or to avoid capture by police.
What problems did you have? I overshot the runway. It's supposed to be...
Danny Yates, that was the first time that he really realized what he was into. He was just a good old country boy, and there wasn't any way he was going to get involved in a murder. And that's where one of our night vision devices got away from him as a result of that crash. And they had done this just to throw off Barkley.
The plan seemed to work.
Hey, look who's here.
The Colombians were satisfied. Burke was released, and Deming was alive. Yates went on to tell investigators that on returning to the U.S., the three went into hiding. Yates also told them that tensions among members of the company were running high. The company was in danger of pulling apart. Investigators hoped these tensions would prompt the men to make a mistake that would lead to their capture. On September 10th, 1985, a low-flying plane raced across the night sky. Inside, two men put on skydiving gear. They put the plane on automatic pilot. When everything was ready, they jumped into the night. The next morning, one of the parachutists was found dead on a driveway in Knoxville, Tennessee. On his body, police found over $20 million worth of cocaine. The mysterious man was identified as Drew Thornton, a former narcotics officer from Lexington, Kentucky. The FBI and local law enforcement had been watching Thornton and his close friend Frank Barkley. The men were living a lavish lifestyle, and investigators suspected they were involved in a drug smuggling operation. They called it the Company.
My partner.
Law enforcement agencies had been trailing the Company for years. But the two men always seemed one step ahead of them. After Drew's death, agents were scrambling to try and uncover what may have happened to him, and if anyone would have wanted him dead. Investigators looked into a piece of rural, wooded property he owned called Triad. Lexington Police Detective John Bizak.
This property was down on the Kentucky River, and it was alleged to belong to Trotter, Thornton, and some other folks. There were accusations that there was a soldier of fortune type training going on at that facility.
Neighbors in the area reported sighting strange men in camouflage gear and hearing the sound of gunshots. Don Powers of the Kentucky State Police.
The Triad was somewhat always a mystery. We had information that it was an encampment and a training ground probably for terrorists or something of that nature.
By 1980, the Company was growing. As they got bigger, they needed more and more security. The group had become a strange meld of socialites and social misfits, including smugglers, gun runners, and mercenaries. Profits were at an all-time high, but tensions were splintering the group.
I want to be alive. Lee's dead and we're next.
Barkley's relentless pursuit of the Chagra empire infuriated Thornton. To Barkley, his partner seemed short-sighted and disloyal.
Don't you think after how much we've made, the rest
Word on the street was that their partnership finally cracked under the strain.
You're doing it without thought.
Thornton and Barkley severed their ties. Drew Thornton and Frank Barkley went from partners to competitors after they had a falling out and broke up their drug smuggling ring.
Listen. As long as we're in here.
In January 1980, ATF agents heard that Frank and his cousin John were staying at a hotel in Philadelphia. John was under investigation for stealing arms from the China Lake Naval Facility. ATF Special Agent Frank Eddy.
They were, tipping big tips to the maids. The maids were told at times to stay out of the rooms, not to make up the beds, not to do anything.
Their behavior made the staff suspicious.
Housekeeping!
At certain times, the maids did see firearms, guns in the rooms. They notified the Philadelphia police.
On January 4th, 1980, authorities raided the motel. They arrested John Barkley, charging him with firearms violations. But detectives had been told 2 men occupied the room. John Barkley told the cops where to find his cousin. He wasn't far. At the time of the raid, Frank Barkley was at a local airport. Officials caught up with him minutes before he boarded his plane. He was found to be carrying semi-automatic weapons, commando daggers, several fraudulent IDs, and more than $22,000 in cash.
First, we really became involved in this was after they were arrested in Philadelphia. The Philadelphia police contacted Lexington police and ATF, and, asking for information on who these guys are, what they're doing, anything about them, they have criminal record.
The Philadelphia authorities learned that John Barkley was under suspicion for the alleged theft of military hardware from a secret testing site in California.
Turn to the right. Okay,
The Philadelphia police found Frank Barkley had no arrest record or outstanding warrants. He seemed the picture of a typical upscale businessman. But federal authorities revealed that he too was being investigated for his role in the thefts and his links to drugs, guns, and organized crime. Philadelphia police soon recognized that they had inadvertently busted members of a large-scale weapons network. They uncovered a small cache of weapons, silencers, and telephone scramblers.
When they raided the room, they found guns, certain other eavesdropping equipment. There was also some documents. One was a receipt for a storage facility in Lexington, Kentucky, and of course that piqued everybody's interest.
Agents had been tipped off that the door of the storage facility was booby-trapped.
And the door wasn't booby-trapped. We thought, well, you know, maybe something else is booby-trapped. I mean, here's all these weapons. There's boxes and cartons of ammunition and all kinds of stuff. So we had to be really careful about going through the individual items about, you know, when does this blow up? I mean, is this going to blow up in your face, or what's in this box?
The assortment of weapons and military gear stunned the officers. Much of it consisted of items stolen from China Lake. A Starlight night scope, Soviet-made machine guns with anti-aircraft mounts, taser stun guns, an anti-tank gun, even semi-automatic M2 carbines. The arsenal was estimated to be worth $250,000.
I was very much surprised to find some of the type of weapons that they had. Just isn't something that the average person is going to have in their gun collection, you know. This, of course, indicated to us that these people are involved in some other type of activity. We started tracing the guns. One of the weapons, a .22 caliber survival rifle, was registered in the name of Andrew Thornton, and it had been purchased from a local gun dealer by the name of Mike Kelly.
It seemed an open and shut case. Investigators hoped the legal pressure on Barkley would push him to testify against Thornton and other members of the company. But Frank Barkley had other plans. After years of tracking members of the company, a drug and gun running ring based in Lexington, Kentucky, federal officials finally caught a break. For the first time, members of the company were being brought to trial. Frank Barkley was arrested and tried in Lexington, Kentucky. His cousin John in Philadelphia, both on weapons charges. The media was fascinated by the unusual case. The details of it like something from a spy novel. In addition to weapons, officers found in the motel room a listing of top-secret radio frequencies of the U.S. government, radar jamming equipment, and memos on the proper use of disguises and wigs. It seemed certain Frank Barkley would go to jail. But as Lexington Herald reporter Valerie Honeycutt recalls, the citizens of Lexington did not all agree.
We got letters to the editor from people, from ministers, and from people saying that it just couldn't be true of these fine men, and that it was all allegation, and we were just trying to sell papers by muddying these folks' names. A lot of community outrage that we were continuing to write about this.
But it would be difficult to stop the members of the company. Both Frank and John Barkley were found not guilty. ATF agent Frank Eddy.
See, when you find these type of devices, the machine guns with the anti-aircraft mount, the anti-tank guns, the radar jamming equipment, yeah, it makes you think. I mean, what lawful purpose could these individuals have with that? There's no civilian use for this type of weaponry.
Despite their good fortune, members of the company could not exactly breathe easy.
Ray, why don't you count the nice man's money?
By 1981, the gang had splintered apart. Many were in hiding, or the targets of indictments from prosecutors in other states. Mike Kelly and his wife Bonnie had been close friends of Drew and Frank's. Mike, who supplied the two with electronics and guns, soon found himself entangled in a Florida drug case. Agent Jim Huggins.
Mike Kelly was employed by some drug smugglers in South Florida to supply electronic equipment to a boat they were equipping for a shipment of marijuana being smuggled into Punta Gorda. In the process of this operation, Mike went to Florida, and when he was down there, an informant blew the whistle on the whole operation, and he was arrested.
Kelly denied any knowledge of the drug deal, but the ploy didn't work. He was found guilty of drug conspiracy charges. The first alleged member of the company was behind bars.
Mike Kelly was arrested in South Florida on the drug smuggling operation, and the prosecutor was pressuring him very hard to get his cooperation. That sent shockwaves throughout the group in Lexington.
Charlotte Harbor, Florida, January 16th, 1982. Shortly before 7 p.m., the doorbell rang at the home of District Attorney Larry Noland. It happened in seconds.
Larry Nolan?
Yes, how can I help you?
Don't go! Larry? Larry?
D.A. Noland was shot in the heart at point-blank range. He was declared dead at the scene. Detectives knew the victim. Noland was a criminal prosecutor known to be tough on drug runners. He was the same prosecutor pressuring Mike Kelly to name his criminal associates.
When the prosecutor was killed, his wife had overheard some conversation indicating that possibly he knew who the person was, and then she heard the shots ring out, and it was some indication that the killer was known to her husband.
According to an autopsy report, the assailant had used wad cutter bullets.
Most bullets have a rounded edge. These are flat with a hole in the center, and what it does when it enters the body, it rips and tears more than a straight bullet that would go straight through. It does more damage.
Officers canvassed the quiet, affluent neighborhood. A witness recalled seeing a woman with blonde hair in a blue jogging suit. She'd gotten into a car.
I'm Officer Schmitz.
Based on witness descriptions, a composite sketch of the woman was developed. A rental car agent identified Bonnie Kelly, Mike Kelly's wife, from the composite sketch of the alleged shooter. No one was surprised among the Kentucky State Police.
Well, it was everyone's suspicion that Bonnie killed the prosecutor. He had quite a reputation of being hard on drug people, people involved in drug trafficking, and I guess they thought they would have a better chance with someone else. Things were really beginning to hop. Things were beginning to come together. Information was coming fast and furious, and the heat was on. The group, I'm sure, knew it.
Bonnie, however, had a solid alibi.
I have a few questions for you right quick.
Harvey Walker, a close friend of Drew and Frank's, stepped forward claiming that he and Bonnie had been in a business meeting on the night in question.
They were stonewalled by Walker. He refused to talk to them. They didn't really have a lot of direct evidence. No one would cooperate.
FBI agent Jim Huggins knew they needed someone on the inside with less allegiance to the group. Someone more easily manipulated than Harvey Walker and Drew Thornton. He set his sights on Bonnie's sister. She had lived with Mike and Bonnie Kelly off and on for years.
I want you to tell me what your sister was doing.
She was privy to their conversations and the activities of their friends. Fearing she would be indicted as an accomplice, she confessed what she knew to Agent Huggins. She told Huggins that after Mike's arrest, the group was nervous. They needed a plan.
Harvey Walker was concerned that if Mike Kelly had agreed to cooperate with the prosecutor, then all their activities, illegal activities that had been committing over the years would all become to the forefront and they'd all be in a lot of trouble.
Shouldn't be a problem.
The group had an idea. It was a chance for Bonnie Kelly to reveal her loyalty to the company. Bonnie's sister's information broke the case wide open.
After the murder, Bonnie returned to Fort Myers, checked in a motel with Stephen Taylor and her getaway driver, and they made a phone call to her sister in Lexington.
Bonnie told her sister to give Harvey Walker a message. It's been done.
You, Trotter.
In exchange for immunity, she agreed to testify against her sister at trial. But Mike Kelly's wife, Bonnie, wouldn't take the fall alone.
Mike's wife had never been involved in a crime in her entire life. Harvey Walker had given her the weapon. Harvey Walker told her that she should use wad cutter ammunition, and she and her sister went to a Kmart in Lexington and purchased a box of wad cutters. And he told her the reason for that it would do more damage and would kill someone easier than a regular round.
So what do you got?
Agents broadened the net and began bringing in anyone they could find who was connected to the company.
It was a lengthy investigation because of the number of places that we had to go to. The amount of confirmations that we had to do, the amount of grand jury subpoenas that had to go out. But the more things we corroborated, the more we said, geez, we got a tiger by the tail here.
In January 1982, Assistant U.S. Attorney Brian Layton indicted Frank and John Barkley, Drew Thornton, Mike Kelly, and 21 other company members. The 7 counts ranged from drug trafficking to stealing and receiving government property. Barkley was arrested outside Chicago. Frank Barkley was sentenced to 20 years for the China Lake case, as well as an additional 4.5 years on out-of-state drug charges.
20 years was probably the maximum we could get. So it was a just sentence at the time. Did he deserve life? If there were any killings, yeah, he deserved life. We just could never pin any killings on him.
Thornton was harder to catch. When news of the indictments broke, he fled.
Charlie X-ray 7501, Alpha Niner, do you copy? Charlie X-ray 7501, Alpha Niner, do you copy? Having mechanical difficulty. Landing at Southern Pine Airport.
U.S. Customs caught a lucky break when they intercepted a radio transmission from a plane bearing Thornton's call letters. Thornton logged a flight plan indicating he was headed to a North Carolina airport for repairs. Police were waiting for him when he landed. He was arrested and held on $1 million bail.
When he was arraigned in court, he was extremely arrogant. It's like, oh, you have no case against me. Oh, this is BS.
Because there was little evidence linking Thornton to the events at China Lake, Drew served only a few months for his part in the operation. He would be released in the fall of 1982 and promptly disappear. When a suspected drug smuggler named Drew Thornton died in a fall from an airplane, police in Knoxville, Tennessee began trying to understand what could have caused his death. The Knoxville police called upon the FBI and the DEA for help. At the time of his death, the DEA had an open case file on Thornton. It appeared that after the China Lake case had put many of his friends behind bars, he was now working alone. The DEA had followed him to Miami. Agents had been keeping a close watch on Drew Thornton. In August, Drew made contact with an aircraft broker named Levi Schulman. He was unaware the aircraft broker was also a DEA informant. DEA agent Kieran Cobell.
Well, Levi Schulman was brokering aircraft to groups that he knew were involved in transporting cocaine up from South America into South Florida. And he had a history with these people.
Agent Kieran Cobell observed from a distance.
There were meetings that were being conducted, and he would tell us about that. And we would cover those. So we would conduct surveillance of those meetings.
Schulman was a career criminal and had been known to work deals on the side and pass bad information.
I had been down that road with informants before. And I knew the game that he was playing.
Florida was a major port of entry for drugs. The DEA worked to stem the flow, but to do that, they had to know when the drugs were moving.
I had every hope that we would know when Thornton would be taking off. And Schulman knew that we wanted that information.
Schulman had orchestrated hundreds, if not thousands, of deals like this before. But to Cobell, this seemed different. Schulman seemed genuinely fond of the stranger from Kentucky.
I think he liked him. I think he trusted him, and I think the proof of that to me is the fact that Thornton actually stayed with Schulman in his townhouse or his condominium at the Jockey Club.
Because Schulman couldn't be trusted, Agent Cobell and his partner kept close tabs on Drew Thornton. But Cobell knew the former police officer might quickly pick up on surveillance. They needed to be careful. Thornton had pulled onto Miami's Palmetto Expressway headed north. Cobell and his partner split up. They kept in contact about Thornton's location via a DEA radio frequency.
My partner and I were communicating on the radio, right, that Thornton's headed down to the next exit, because somebody's in the lead and then somebody stays behind on surveillance. So it becomes pretty clear that as we're communicating, Thornton begins rubbernecking, more than just casual looking around. He's looking in the rearview mirror in the passenger's compartment. He's looking in the side rearview mirrors. He's looking for something. It's almost like as we're talking, he's listening to us. Thornton gets off at the next exit, and I communicate with my partner. I said, I don't think he's made us, but he knows something's going on. Let's get off him.
Agent Cobell's fears about tracking Thornton were justified. Schulman later told him Thornton had a scanner and had picked up Cobell's communications with his partner. Thornton disappeared that day.
It's really much more difficult to conduct an investigation of people that type because they know the logical investigative steps that you're going to undertake.
The next time Agent Cobell heard about Drew Thornton, he was dead. Cobell was expecting his informant to tell him about Thornton's next drug run, but that information never came. Agent Cobell went to talk with Schulman to try and determine what had happened. Schulman admitted he'd provided Thornton with the plane for his last flight. The plan was to pick up some 800 pounds of cocaine in Colombia.
So what can you tell me about Drew Thornton?
The information was new to Agent Cobell.
Well, I talked with him.
Schulman had not given me the call that I needed to have so that I could be on alert, so that I could alert customs. There is a whole team of law enforcement people who needed to be put on alert when an aircraft launches on a smuggling trip like this one did.
Cobell was furious his informant had held out on him.
He says, well, I was contacted by so-and-so in Colombia, and I got to go up to Kentucky to find out what happened. And I said, and I'm going with you. And then he was, oh, no, you can't do that. And it's like, well, I'm not really asking you. The only logical plan was to go up to Kentucky and try and track down through different various points of contact up there who had the cocaine, where it was, and try and find out who else was involved.
Agent Cobell headed to Kentucky to try and find the rest of Drew's stash of cocaine and possibly find his murderer. When Drew Thornton was found dead with millions of dollars worth of cocaine strapped to his body, DEA agent Kieran Cobell and his informant Levi Schulman went to find out who had the rest of the drugs. The two men started with the woman closest to Drew. Levi Schulman promised Cobell that he would lead him to Thornton's girlfriend, Rachel Gant. She had agreed to meet with him.
John?
Gant admitted being in a hotel the night that Thornton died, waiting for him.
Waiting for Drew's call.
Gant admitted that Thornton had not showed up, but his accomplice on the aircraft had showed up, and Gant and the accomplice had waited until sometime early in the morning for Thornton to come.
The reason we asked you down here.
But Thornton never came. Now that Thornton was dead, Gant knew his drug business partners would come after her.
The Colombians would be looking for their cocaine, and so she knew that she was in a bit of a hard spot. Gant said that she was going to be going into hiding and that any further contact could be made through the attorney.
With that, Rachel Gant disappeared, and the rest of the drugs and the money were never recovered. The investigators brought together all the information they gathered on Drew Thornton and pieced together the events leading up to his final flight. On September 10th, 1985, Drew Thornton and a co-pilot arrived in Colombia ready to pick up a substantial load, 800 pounds of cocaine, packed in a series of large black duffel bags. The deal was going down, but the DEA had no idea. Schulman had held out on them. Several hours into the flight, somewhere over the southern U.S., Drew noticed it, a plane in the distance. He was convinced they were being followed. Thornton ordered his pilot to lose the plane. But the aircraft in pursuit was larger and gaining fast. Knoxville, Tennessee Police Detective Jerry Day.
We surmised that Andrew and his accomplice had thought they had picked up an air tail either from the Drug Enforcement Administration, the FBI, or Customs. He had become very paranoid. We know that later on and through the investigation. He was a very paranoid individual. and he probably thought he was being followed.
For Thornton, there was no choice.
Give me the headphones.
He couldn't afford to be caught. He radioed Rachel, who was awaiting his arrival in Knoxville.
Rachel, do you copy?
Rachel, do you copy?
Go for Rachel.
When interviewed by the DEA, Rachel refused to identify Thornton's accomplice or divulge many details.
We're going to have
But she confirmed that Thornton sounded panicked.
Drew,
He
you're
spoke
going
of
to
the
bail
chase
out of
plane
the plane? What about our cargo?
and the need to bail out. Then he signed off for the last time. Rachel Gant never gave investigators any more information.
Rachel Gant was very loyal, protecting him right up to the end, and refused to testify before a grand jury in Knoxville, which resulted in her indictment. But to this day, I don't think she's ever betrayed his confidence. A pretty hardcore individual, in my opinion.
The men jumped at night, a dangerous prospect even for someone as seasoned as Thornton.
Don't worry, you're gonna be fine.
According to Gant, the pilot had never jumped before. His was a leap of faith. But Thornton welcomed the danger. Some said he thought he was invincible. But Thornton was not invincible. In fact, none of the gang escaped capture or prosecution.
They were a tight, close, knit group of friends. And I think that they fed on each other's adventures and misdeeds. In fact, I think they kind of fed on each other's crimes. The fact that, and that they were all connected with each other, that they were somehow involved in the assassinations of both a federal judge and a federal prosecutor, I think speaks volumes about the fact that they thought that they were untouchable. They thought that they were capable of doing anything and trying anything and getting away with anything, and they did.
But when indictments and various trials were finally handed down, the company turned on its own, friend testifying against friend. Frank and John Barkley, Mike and Bonnie Kelly, and Harvey Walker were all found guilty on a variety of charges from murder to conspiracy. Only Mike Kelly's drug conviction was reversed on appeal. What happened to Drew Thornton, however, is still not entirely clear. The Knoxville, Tennessee medical examiner eventually declared his death an accident, the mysterious injuries most likely caused by a duffel bag, battering him all the way down. Or he may have struck the wing of his own plane when he jumped. But how such an experienced jumper could make such a mistake is unclear.
He impacted something as he was exiting the aircraft. The wound to the bottom of his chin made it very evident that something had impacted his head. What we surmised was that it rendered him unconscious to the point that he was falling, and then once he regained consciousness, he immediately pulled his emergency chute because he wasn't sure how far from the ground he was.
But it was too late. The emergency chute jerked Thornton onto his back.
Everyone that knew Drew liked him personally, but there was always this dark side.
It was that dark side that drove Thornton into a world of crime, drugs, and guns. And it was that dark side that ultimately killed him.